For weeks, Sarah was haunted by the same mountain lion, scratching desperately at her cabin window each night. What began as terrifying quickly became mysterious. This wasn't normal predator behavior. The scratches grew more frantic, the animal's eyes more pleading. When Sarah finally mustered the courage to follow the creature into the wilderness, she discovered something so shocking it would change her life forever. Sarah Matthews had always found peace in isolation. As a wildlife photographer, her remote Montana cabin offered the perfect balance of solitude and proximity to the untamed wilderness she loved to capture through her lens. But nothing in her 15 years of documenting nature's most elusive creatures could have prepared her for what happened that cold November night, when the boundary between observer and observed would be shattered forever. The first scratch came just after midnight, a sound so distinct and deliberate that it jolted Sarah from her sleep. A harsh, unmistakable scraping that didn't belong in her world of creaking timber and whispering pines. Claws against glass, unmistakable, chilling, and far too intentional to be random. "Who's there?" she called out, heart pounding against her ribs as she fumbled for the flashlight beside her bed, knocking over a glass of water in her panic. The beam cut through darkness to reveal golden eyes staring back at her, unblinking, intense, and belonging to one of the most dangerous predators in North America. Eyes that didn't show the typical fear or aggression of a wild animal, but something else entirely. Something that made Sarah's skin prickle with unease. A mountain lion, full-grown and powerful, its massive paw raised against her bedroom window, muscles rippling beneath its tawny coat. In the harsh beam of her flashlight, Sarah could see the creature's whiskers twitch, its breath fogging the glass between them. A living, breathing nightmare just inches from where she slept. Sarah's blood ran cold as primitive fear flooded her system. Mountain lions didn't approach human dwellings. They avoided people at all costs, slipping like ghosts through forests without leaving a trace. Everything she knew about these solitary predators contradicted what was happening. Yet here one was, deliberately making contact, its eyes locked with hers in a way that seemed almost purposeful, intelligent, pleading. "Get out of here!" Sarah shouted, her voice cracking as she banged against the window frame with trembling hands, employing every tactic she knew to scare off wildlife. She flashed her light rapidly, made herself appear larger, created noise, all the things experts recommended. But instead of fleeing, the mountain lion simply tilted its head, scratched once more at the glass with deliberate slowness, and continued its unwavering stare. The predator's tail swished back and forth, not in the agitated manner of a threatened animal, but with the patience of one waiting for understanding. For 3 terrifying hours, this standoff continued. Sarah called the local ranger station twice, but the night patrol was handling an emergency on the other side of the county. She was on her own, watching as this apex predator paced outside her window, occasionally pressing its face against the glass, making low sounds she couldn't interpret. But that sent shivers down her spine. Only when the first hints of dawn streaked the sky did the mountain lion finally disappear into the pre-dawn forest, melting into the shadows as if it had never existed. Left alone, Sarah collapsed onto her bed. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash, leaving her shaken and confused. She ran her fingers through her tangled hair, trying to make sense of what had happened. She convinced herself it was a random encounter, a curious cat, perhaps drawn by the scent of her dinner or confused by its reflection. Maybe it was sick or disoriented. There had to be a logical explanation, because the alternative, that this wild animal had sought her out specifically, was too unsettling to consider. As morning light filled her cabin, Sarah examined the window, finding distinct claw marks etched into the wooden frame, physical proof that the night's events hadn't been some vivid nightmare. She photographed them meticulously, her professional habits kicking in despite her exhaustion. Then she reinforced her windows, checked every lock, and called a local wildlife expert who promised to stop by the following day. But what Sarah didn't know, as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep with her camera clutched to her chest and a knife on her nightstand, was that this wasn't just a curious predator or random encounter. This mountain lion was desperately trying to tell her something, carrying a burden that would soon become hers as well. And it would return night after night, growing more insistent, more desperate, until she finally understood its message and followed it into the heart of darkness. The wildlife expert, a grizzled man named Jack Thornton, had listened to Sarah's story with skepticism written across his weathered face. Mountain lions don't behave that way, he'd insisted, examining the claw marks on her window frame with calloused fingers that had spent decades tracking predators across Montana's wilderness. They're solitary ambush predators. They don't seek human interaction. Yet even as he dismissed her experience, his eyes betrayed uncertainty. 30 years in wildlife management, and he'd never heard anything like it. "Set up your trail cameras," he advised before leaving, adjusting his worn leather hat. "If it comes back, we'll need documentation. And Sarah," he added, pausing at her door, "keep your rifle close, just in case." Sarah had nodded, already planning to position her professional equipment around the cabin's perimeter. As a wildlife photographer whose work had been featured in National Geographic and who had spent months tracking elusive snow, leopards in the Himalayas, she had the tools and expertise to capture whatever might return. She spent the remainder of the day meticulously setting up her gear. High-resolution cameras with night vision capabilities, motion sensors calibrated to ignore small animals, and remote triggers that would allow her to capture images from inside the safety of her cabin. 3 nights passed without incident. The forest around her cabin returned to its normal rhythms. Owls hooting in the darkness, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Sarah began to believe the encounter had been an anomaly, perhaps a young cougar disoriented by recent wildfires in the next county, until the scratching resumed on the 4th night, more insistent than before. A deliberate cadence that sent her heart racing. This time, Sarah was ready. Instead of panicking, she grabbed her camera and approached the window cautiously, her stockinged feet silent on the wooden floor. The mountain lion was there again, its powerful frame illuminated by the motion-activated lights she'd installed. But something was different. In the clear light, Sarah could see the animal's condition. Ribs slightly visible beneath its tawny coat, a small notch in its left ear, and most notably, a distinctive scar running along its right flank that looked like it might have come from a run-in with barbed wire or another predator. This wasn't just any mountain lion, it was a female, and Sarah could see the slightly swollen teats that indicated she was nursing. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "You're a mother," Sarah whispered, lowering her camera after capturing several shots. The realization shifted something in her perception. The big cat wasn't threatening, she was desperate. Those weren't the actions of an aggressive predator, but of a mother seeking help. Sarah pressed her palm against the glass, and to her astonishment, the mountain lion mirrored the gesture, placing her massive paw directly opposite Sarah's hand, separated only by the thin barrier between them. For 2 hours, Sarah observed the mountain lion's behavior, documenting every movement with the methodical precision that had made her famous in wildlife photography circles. The animal would scratch at the window, then pace away toward the tree line, looking back as if expecting Sarah to follow. Then it would return, repeating the pattern with increasing urgency, occasionally letting out soft vocalizations that Sarah had never heard from a mountain lion before. Are not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something in between that seemed almost like communication. By morning, Sarah had hundreds of photographs and several video clips showing behavior that would baffle any wildlife biologist. She spent hours organizing the evidence, selecting the clearest images that showed the mountain lion's unusual behavior. She sent the best images to Ranger Mike Collins, who had been skeptical on the phone but agreed to come see the evidence after seeing just 3 of her photographs. "I've never seen anything like this," Mike admitted, scrolling through Sarah's photographs for what seemed like the 100th time. His ranger hat sat on her kitchen table as he reviewed the footage for the 3rd time, occasionally pausing to make notes. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around his concerned expression. This isn't normal behavior. Something's driving her to seek human contact. "She wants me to follow her," Sarah said, voicing the thought that had been growing in her mind since that moment of connection through the glass. She pushed a mug of coffee toward the ranger, who accepted it with a distracted nod. Mike's head snapped up, his expression hardening. "Absolutely not. Whatever's happening, you cannot follow a mountain lion into the forest. That's suicide." He set down his mug with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "I've worked in these mountains for 22 years, Sarah. I've seen what these cats can do. They can take down elk 3 times their size with a single well-placed bite to the neck. A human wouldn't stand a chance. But, no buts, Sarah." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to emphasize his seriousness. 3 years ago, we had a hiker who surprised a female with cubs. We found what was left of him scattered across half an acre. I'm not letting that happen to you." He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to contact the state wildlife agency. We might need to tranquilize and relocate her if this continues. It's for her own good as well as yours." After Mike left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts and photographs, the ticking of her grandfather clock the only sound in the cabin. She enlarged images on her computer, studying the mountain lion's eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence and desperation that transcended species barriers. Night after night, the pattern continued. The mountain lion would appear, sometimes at her bedroom window, sometimes at the kitchen or living room, scratching at different windows and attempting to lead Sarah into the forest. Each time, the cat appeared thinner, more desperate, the gleam of her ribs more pronounced beneath her fur. Sarah began keeping a detailed log in a leather-bound journal, noting the time of arrival, behavior patterns, and physical changes in the animal. She noticed the mountain lion was losing weight despite the abundant deer population in the area. Whatever was keeping her near Sarah's cabin was preventing her from hunting properly. Sarah found herself leaving out raw meat purchased from the local butcher, watching from behind curtains as the mountain lion reluctantly ate, always seeming more interested in getting Sarah to follow her than in the food itself. By the 2nd week, word had spread through the small community. Local news picked up the story of the window lion, as they called her, running a segment that featured some of Sarah's photographs. Curious neighbors and thrill seekers began driving by Sarah's remote property, hoping to catch a glimpse of the unusual phenomenon. Some brought cameras, others brought rifles just in case, making Sarah increasingly protective of the troubled animal. The attention only made the mountain lion more elusive, appearing later at night when the area was quiet again, her visits becoming increasingly frantic. Sarah found herself growing attached to the creature, staying up late waiting for her arrival, speaking softly to her through the glass. "What is it?" she would ask. What are you trying to tell me? The mountain lion would only stare back, those amber eyes filled with what Sarah could only interpret as pleading. On the 15th night, everything changed. Sarah was reviewing footage at her desk, the blue light of her computer screen illuminating her tired face, when the scratching began. Not at her bedroom window this time, but at her front door. The sound was different too. Not methodical and patient, but frantic and desperate, splintering the wooden frame with its intensity. Sarah approached cautiously, camera in hand, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it must be audible even through the door. Through the peephole, she could see the mountain lion pacing back and forth on her porch, making a sound she'd never heard before. A low, mournful cry that seemed to reverberate through the wooden door and settle somewhere deep in Sarah's chest. "I can't help you if I don't know what you want," Sarah whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool wood, knowing the animal couldn't understand, but feeling compelled to communicate, nonetheless. The scratching paused momentarily, as if the mountain lion were listening. As if in response, the mountain lion reared up, placing both paws against the door with such force that the hinges groaned in protest. Then, in a display that sent ice through Sarah's veins, the animal threw its head back and released a sound that was neither growl nor roar, but something primal and filled with anguish. The unmistakable cry of a mother in distress. Sarah's phone rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped her camera. It was Ranger Mike. "We've approved the tranquilizer operation," he said without preamble, his voice tight with concern. "Team will be there tomorrow at dawn. We've got specialists coming in from Missoula with tracking equipment. We can't let this continue, Sarah. It's not safe for you or the animal." As Sarah listened to the logistics of the capture plan, how they would set up blinds, use meat bait, and prepare dart guns with carefully measured sedatives, she watched through the window as the mountain lion retreated to the forest edge. Instead of disappearing into the underbrush, as she usually did, however, the cat sat watching the cabin, her tail twitching occasionally, her eyes reflecting the porch light. Patient, determined, and filled with an intelligence that defied explanation. "I'll be ready," Sarah told Mike, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. But as she hung up the phone, the weight of the ranger's keys heavy in her palm, she knew she had made a different decision entirely. She glanced at her hiking boots by the door, her backpack hanging on its hook, and the tranquilizer gun Mike had left for emergency use only. Tomorrow would come too late for whatever the mountain lion was trying to show her. Sarah began gathering supplies: water bottles, energy bars, her first aid kit, a compass, and her satellite phone. She checked the battery on her headlamp and slipped a hunting knife into her belt. As she worked, she could feel the mountain lion's eyes on her through the window, watching, waiting, somehow knowing that Sarah had finally understood. As the scratching grew more desperate each night, Sarah faced a decision that would force her to choose between safety and the unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong in the forest beyond her cabin. The mountain lion had chosen her for a reason, and by first light, Sarah would discover why, even if it meant risking everything to follow a predator into the wilderness. Sarah waited until the first hint of dawn crept over the eastern ridge before making her move. The mountain lion had remained at the forest's edge all night, occasionally disappearing into the shadows, only to return minutes later, as if checking to ensure Sarah hadn't abandoned her vigil. In those quiet hours before sunrise, Sarah had battled her own doubts and fears, questioning her sanity for even considering following a wild predator into the wilderness. Yet every time those doubts threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the desperation in the cat's eyes. a universal language that transcended species. With trembling hands, Sarah penned a quick note to Ranger Mike. Following the cat. Tracking device in my backpack activated. Don't follow immediately. I think she's trying to show me something important. If I don't check in by sunset, send help. Coordinates of my starting path marked on the attached map. She hesitated, then added, "This isn't recklessness, Mike. I've documented enough animal behavior to know when something isn't right. Trust me." She placed it prominently on her kitchen table where the wildlife team would find it, weighing it down with her spare set of keys. Sarah slipped into her hiking boots and secured her pack, which contained not only survival supplies, but also her camera equipment. She was still a photographer at heart, even in the face of this inexplicable situation. She'd packed methodically: water purification tablets, high-calorie protein bars, a compact thermal blanket, waterproof matches, a multi-tool, and a small medical kit. The satellite phone was fully charged, its emergency beacon tested. The tranquilizer gun Mike had left was tucked into a side holster, a last resort she prayed she wouldn't need. She'd practiced loading and firing it under Mike's supervision, but the thought of using it against any animal, let alone the one that had sought her help, made her stomach churn. When she finally opened her front door, the mountain lion was waiting. The massive predator stood perfectly still in the pearly light of dawn, amber eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her breath catch. Morning dew glistened on her tawny coat, and Sarah could see each individual whisker, each spot of darker fur that created the unique pattern of this remarkable animal. For a moment, human and cat regarded each other in the pale morning light, a silent understanding passing between them. "Okay," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Show me." As if understanding her words, the mountain lion turned and padded toward the tree line, her movements fluid and purposeful. She stopped to look back when she reached the first pines, her tail swishing impatiently. Sarah hesitated at the edge of her porch, the safety of her cabin at her back, the unknown wilderness ahead. The weight of her decision pressed down on her. She was violating every safety protocol, every piece of advice she'd ever been given about wildlife encounters. The cat made that strange vocalization again, part plea, part command. And Sarah took her first step forward, crossing an invisible threshold between civilization and wild. The mountain lion maintained a consistent distance, close enough for Sarah to follow, far enough to maintain a respectful separation. They moved deeper into the forest, following no discernible human trail. Sarah marked their path using bright orange surveyor's tape, tying small strips to branches every 100 yards or so. She also activated the GPS tracking app on her phone, dropping digital pins at regular intervals. The forest grew denser, the morning light filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns that played across the forest floor like liquid gold. The sounds of the forest enveloped them. The distant rat-a-tat-tat of woodpeckers, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Occasionally, birds would fall silent as they passed, sensing the presence of a predator. Sarah found herself moving differently, more carefully, her senses heightened in a way she'd never experienced before. She was seeing the forest through new eyes, aware of subtle shifts in the environment that she might have missed before. After an hour of steady hiking, they reached a small stream that cut through the forest floor, its clear water bubbling over smooth stones. The mountain lion paused, drinking deeply before continuing. Sarah refilled her water bottle, adding a purification tablet as a precaution. She noted with growing concern that they were heading into a remote section of the national forest that few hikers ever ventured into. A region marked on maps with few trails and many contour lines. Her satellite phone showed they were already 5 miles from her cabin, moving steadily northwest toward higher elevation. "Where are you taking me?" Sarah murmured, watching as the mountain lion picked her way across a fallen log that bridged a deeper section of the stream. The cat paused at the question, looking back with those intelligent eyes, before continuing her journey. By midday, the character of the forest had changed. The familiar ponderosa pines gave way to older growth, massive cedars and hemlocks that spoke of untouched wilderness. Some of these giants must have been standing for centuries, their massive trunks wider than Sarah could wrap her arms around. The undergrowth thinned beneath these ancient sentinels, allowing easier passage, but the terrain grew steeper. Sarah's legs burned with exertion as they climbed a rocky slope. She paused occasionally to catch her breath, taking swigs from her water bottle and checking her GPS coordinates. The mountain lion moved with effortless grace ahead of her, occasionally stopping on an outcropping to ensure Sarah was still following. It was during one of these pauses that Sarah first noticed something strange. The mountain lion had stopped on a boulder, her posture suddenly rigid. Instead of looking back at Sarah, she was staring intently at something in the distance, her ears flattened against her skull, tail twitching with agitation. Sarah followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual among the trees. "What is it?" Sarah murmured, more to herself than to the cat. She set down her pack and removed her camera, attaching her longest telephoto lens. She raised it to her eye, using it as a spotter's scope to scan the area. Through the magnification, she caught a flash of something unnatural, a glint of metal where no metal should be, a geometric shape that didn't belong among the organic forms of the forest. Sarah lowered her camera, frowning. They were deep in the wilderness now, miles from any official trail or campsite. There shouldn't be anything man-made in this area. She took several photographs, documenting the location and the anomaly before returning the camera to her pack. The mountain lion resumed their journey with increased urgency, her pace quickening enough that Sarah had to jog occasionally to keep up. She noticed they were no longer moving in a straight line, but seemed to be moving away from whatever had caught the cat's attention, circling around to approach from a different angle. The behavior reminded Sarah of documentaries she'd watched about predators stalking prey, a thought that sent a chill down her spine despite the afternoon warmth. By late afternoon, Sarah's GPS indicated they had traveled nearly 12 miles from her cabin, climbing almost 2,000 feet in elevation. The forest had changed again, transitioning to a mix of subalpine fir and mountain hemlock. They were now in a part of the forest she had never explored, despite her years living on its edge. Her legs trembled with fatigue, and sweat had soaked through her shirt despite the cooler temperatures at this elevation. She was considering calling out to the mountain lion for a rest when the animal suddenly stopped, dropping into a crouch. They had reached the edge of a small clearing. The mountain lion crouched low in the underbrush, her tail twitching with tension, muscles coiled like springs. Sarah followed suit, dropping to her knees beside a fallen log covered in emerald moss. The clearing appeared natural at first glance, a meadow of tall grasses and wildflowers surrounded by ancient trees. But as Sarah's eyes adjusted, she noticed subtle irregularities that her photographer's eye couldn't miss. A section of grass lay flattened in unnatural patterns, too geometric to be the result of wind or animal traffic. Several trees at the far edge showed scarring that didn't match any natural cause Sarah recognized, not lightning strikes or bear marks, but something more deliberate. And there, half hidden by the tall grass, was a small metal object that reflected the late afternoon sun. Sarah raised her camera again, using the zoom to investigate without exposing herself. Through the lens, she could make out what appeared to be a small camera mounted on a metal stake. Its lens pointed toward the center of the clearing. A wildlife camera, perhaps, but unlike any she had ever used. This was more sophisticated, with what looked like a satellite uplink attached to its housing. Someone was monitoring this clearing remotely. The mountain lion made a soft sound deep in her throat, a warning. Sarah lowered her camera and froze as voices drifted across the clearing. Men's voices, speaking in low tones, the words indistinguishable but the cadence unmistakably human. The mountain lion's muscles bunched, ready to flee, but she remained in place, her eyes now fixed on Sarah as if waiting for her to understand. With painful slowness, Sarah shifted position to peer through a gap in the underbrush. On the far side of the clearing, partially obscured by trees, stood what appeared to be a small cabin. No, not a cabin. A structure more temporary in nature. Some kind of research station, or blind, its walls made of camouflaged material that blended with the surrounding forest. Two men stood outside, smoking cigarettes and consulting what looked like a tablet computer. Their conversation was casual, punctuated by occasional laughter, but their posture remained alert, vigilant. They wore no uniforms or identifying clothing, just practical outdoor gear in muted colors. But something about their demeanor spoke of purpose rather than recreation. This was no casual camping trip. One man wore a holstered sidearm, visible when he turned to flick ash from his cigarette. The mountain lion's attention shifted from Sarah to the men, a low growl vibrating through her chest, so quiet Sarah felt it more than heard it. Sarah's mind raced. What was this place? Why had the mountain lion led her here? And what did it have to do with the cat's desperate behavior? She carefully extracted her phone, taking several photos of the men and the structure, making sure her camera was set to silent mode. The answer came as one of the men moved toward the structure, opening a door that had been invisible against the camouflaged exterior. The door was reinforced, Sarah noted, with what appeared to be a digital keypad lock, excessive security for a simple research station. In that brief moment before the door closed behind him, Sarah caught a glimpse of the interior. Her blood turned to ice. Cages. Metal cages lined the walls of the structure. And in one, just visible in that fleeting moment, was the unmistakable form of mountain lion cubs. 3 small, spotted bodies huddled together in the corner of their prison. The realization hit Sarah with physical force, nearly causing her to gasp aloud. The mountain lion beside her wasn't just any cat. She was a mother, and these men had taken her cubs. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The cat's desperate behavior, her weight loss, her determination to find human help. She couldn't free her cubs from a human structure with human locks, so she had sought out a human ally. As the implications cascaded through her mind, the mountain lion turned those intelligent eyes toward her once more. In that moment, Sarah understood the full weight of what she was being asked to do. This wasn't just about following a strange animal into the wilderness. It was about justice, about righting a wrong that this mother couldn't address alone. The mountain lion had sought out the one human she had observed, the one who spent hours photographing wildlife with respect and care rather than hunting it. She had chosen Sarah because she needed a human ally against human enemies. The trust implicit in that choice was staggering. Sarah's photographer's instinct urged her to document everything. This could be evidence of wildlife trafficking, a federal crime with severe penalties. But her human instinct warned of the danger. These men were isolated, armed, and clearly engaged in illegal activity. They would have little reason to leave witnesses. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Sarah reached for her satellite phone. This was bigger than she could handle alone. She needed to contact Ranger Mike to bring in federal wildlife authorities. But before she could power it on, a twig snapped behind them. The mountain lion whirled, her body tensing into a defensive posture, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Sarah turned more slowly, the hairs on the back of her neck rising as she came face to face with a third man, his rifle already raised and pointed directly at the cat that had trusted her enough to lead her into this dangerous situation. "Don't move," the man said, his voice surprisingly soft despite the threat in his stance. He was older than the others, with weathered skin and calculating eyes that assessed both Sarah and the mountain lion with clinical detachment. "And keep that cat under control if you don't want me to put a bullet in it." Sarah's mind raced. The tranquilizer gun was in her pack, out of reach. The mountain lion was coiled to spring, an attack that would surely result in her death. Time seemed to stretch as Sarah realized she had seconds to make a decision that would determine not just her fate, but that of the mother cat and her imprisoned cubs. "Easy now," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. She raised her hands slowly, palms forward, while shifting her body slightly to place herself between the mountain lion and the rifle. "We're not looking for trouble." The man's weathered face revealed nothing, his rifle unwavering. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, set deep beneath a prominent brow weathered by decades in the wilderness. The hands that held the rifle were steady, marked with old scars and the kind of calluses that come from a lifetime of hard work. This was no weekend hunter or casual outdoorsman. He moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had spent his life in these mountains. "You're trespassing on a private research facility with a dangerous predator. I'd say trouble found you." His eyes flicked between Sarah and the mountain lion, who remained frozen in a half-crouch, muscles tensed for either flight or fight. The cat's tail twitched in agitation, but she made no sound, seeming to understand the deadly threat the rifle represented. "What are you doing here? And how did you tame that cat?" Sarah's mind worked frantically, calculating her options. The truth seemed too fantastical, that the mountain lion had sought her out, led her here. She needed to buy time to understand what she was dealing with. The satellite phone in her pocket felt impossibly heavy, useless while this man had them in his sights. Behind her, she could feel the mountain lion's presence like a furnace, radiating tension and wild energy. "I'm a wildlife photographer," she said, gesturing slightly toward her camera. "I've been tracking this female for a research project. She's collared." The lie came easily, born of desperation. "University of Montana study on predator ranges. We're documenting territorial behavior in relation to climate change impacts on prey distribution." The man's eyes narrowed, crinkling at the corners. "No collar that I can see." "It's subcutaneous," Sarah improvised, drawing on her knowledge of actual wildlife research techniques. New technology, less invasive, longer battery life, and it doesn't interfere with natural behaviors like external collars do. She forced a professional smile, trying to project the confidence of a researcher rather than the fear of a woman facing a loaded rifle. "I didn't realize this was private property. There are no markers or signs. According to my maps, this entire area is national forest land." "That's the point," the man said, dryly. He shifted his weight, adjusting his grip on the rifle without lowering it. A bead of sweat traced its way down his temple despite the cool mountain air. "This is a sensitive research operation. We can't have tourists wandering through taking pictures and disturbing the ecosystem. Sarah noted his choice of words. Research operation, rather than private property. Storing the inconsistency away for later. Behind her, the mountain lion made a low sound deep in her throat. A rumble so quiet it might have been mistaken for distant thunder. Sarah could feel the animal's tension, like a physical force at her back. One wrong move from either human could trigger a deadly response. "What kind of research?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone conversational while her eyes searched for any identifying logos or insignia on the man's clothing. There were none. Just practical outdoor wear in muted greens and browns, well worn and chosen for functionality rather than appearance. No patches, no institutional affiliations, nothing to suggest legitimate scientific work. The man's expression hardened, the lines around his mouth deepening. The kind that doesn't welcome uninvited observers. He gestured with the rifle. "Your cat seems mighty interested in our facility, almost like she's been here before." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He knew, or at least he suspected. The mountain lion's behavior was too targeted, too purposeful to be coincidence, and this man had recognized it immediately. She needed to change tactics. "Look," she said, dropping the pretense, her voice taking on a more genuine tone. "I got turned around on a photography hike. I've been documenting the recovery of forest areas after last year's wildfires." This much was true. She had been working on such a project. "The cat's been following me for the last mile or so. I was about to call for help when you showed up." She patted her pocket where the satellite phone made a reassuring bulge. "If this is private land, I'm happy to leave. Just point me toward the national forest boundary, and I'll be on my way." The man studied her face, searching for deception. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through the surrounding pines and the distant call of a bird. Sarah maintained eye contact, willing him to believe her, acutely aware of the mountain lion's breath warming the back of her legs through her hiking pants. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for the sudden crackle of a radio at the man's hip, the electronic noise startlingly artificial in the natural setting. "Jim, you out there? We've got movement on the north perimeter sensors. Might be nothing, but after yesterday's breach, we're not taking chances." The voice was tinny through the small speaker, tense with urgency. "Check in, over." Without taking his eyes off Sarah, the man, Jim apparently, reached for his radio with his left hand, his right still firmly controlling the rifle. That split-second division of attention was all the mountain lion needed. In a blur of tawny fur and coiled muscle, the cat launched herself, not at the man with the gun, as Sarah feared, but into the underbrush to their right, disappearing in an instant with barely a rustle of vegetation to mark her passing. The man swung his rifle toward the movement, but too late. The forest had swallowed the predator as if she had never existed. He cursed, a string of colorful expletives that spoke of military background rather than scientific training, then turned his attention fully to Sarah. "Your research subject just bolted," he said, voice tight with suspicion. Convenient. Sarah's mind raced. Had the mountain lion abandoned her? Or was this a diversion? Either way, she was now alone with an armed man who clearly had something to hide. She felt strangely bereft without the cat's presence, as if she'd lost an ally she hadn't known she needed until this moment. "Animals are unpredictable," she said with a shrug she hoped appeared casual. "That's why we study them. They don't follow human logic or expectations." She gestured to her abandoned backpack. "My tracking equipment's in there. If you'll let me, I can try to pick up her signal. The radio crackled again, more insistent this time. Jim, we need you back here. Something's trying to get into the east storage unit. Motion sensors are going crazy, and the security feed just went down. Possible hostile intrusion. A look of alarm crossed the man's face, momentarily displacing his focus on Sarah. Copy that, he said into the radio, pressing the talk button with his thumb. On my way. He fixed Sarah with a hard stare, all pretense of civility evaporating. You're coming with me. Move. He gestured with the rifle toward the camouflage structure visible through the trees. Sarah had no choice but to comply. She bent slowly to retrieve her backpack, keeping her movements deliberate and telegraphed to avoid spooking the already tense man. As they emerged from the tree line into the clearing, she took the opportunity to scan her surroundings more carefully. Her photographer's eye cataloging details that might prove important later. The facility was larger than it had appeared from her hidden vantage point. The main structure connected to a secondary building by a covered walkway. Both were constructed of materials designed to blend with the forest, their outlines broken up by strategic placement of camouflage netting and native vegetation. Solar panels were mounted on the roof, and a small satellite dish pointed skyward. A generator hummed quietly behind the main building, and what looked like a water purification system stood nearby. This was no temporary setup. Someone had invested significant resources here for a long-term operation. The two men she'd observed earlier were now moving with purpose across the compound, one heading toward what must be the east side of the facility, while the other watched their approach, hand resting on a holstered pistol. This second man was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with the lean, coiled physique of an athlete. His eyes swept over Sarah with clinical assessment, missing nothing. Found a visitor, her captor Jim called out as they approached. Says she's a photographer who got lost. The younger man assessed Sarah with cold eyes, the color of gunmetal. He was clean-shaven with close-cropped hair and the rigid posture that suggested military training. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing beneath the collar of his tactical shirt. In this location? Not likely. Check her pack, Jim ordered, keeping his rifle trained on Sarah. The younger man approached, roughly pulling the backpack from Sarah's shoulders. He began rifling through it, removing her camera equipment with little care for the expensive gear. Her Nikon D850 and several professional lenses were tossed onto a nearby table, followed by memory cards, filters, and her field notebook. Careful with that, Sarah protested, wincing as her 600mm telephoto lens clunked against the tabletop. That's $15,000 of equipment. The comment earned her a warning look from Jim, and no response from the younger man, who continued his methodical search. He removed her water bottles, energy bars, first aid kit, and spare clothing, examining each item before setting it aside. She's carrying a satellite phone, the younger man reported, holding up the device. His voice was flat, emotionless. Latest model, dual-mode operation with emergency beacon capabilities. He turned it over in his hands. And a tranquilizer gun. His expression darkened as he extracted the weapon from its holster, examining the loaded dart with professional interest. Jim's eyes narrowed, his suspicion visibly deepening. Wildlife photographer, huh? Since when do photographers carry tranq guns? Sarah's mind raced for a plausible explanation. It was loaned to me by the research team. There have been aggressive bear encounters in the area. The lie sounded weak even to her own ears. Look, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I'm just doing my job. Whatever operation you're running, it's nothing to do with me. Before Jim could respond, a commotion erupted from the secondary building. The door burst open with a bang that echoed across the clearing, and the third man, older than the second but younger than Jim, with a shock of prematurely gray hair, burst through, his face contorted with alarm. "The cubs are gone. Someone's breached the containment room," he shouted, his voice cracking with stress. "The locks were bypassed, and the monitoring system is down. 3 specimens missing." In that moment of confusion, with all attention diverted to this new crisis, Sarah felt a surge of hope mingled with disbelief. The mountain lion hadn't abandoned her. She'd created a diversion, using the opportunity to free her cubs. The mother's intelligence was even more remarkable than Sarah had imagined. Somehow, the cat had understood not just that her cubs were being held in the facility, but exactly where they were and how to create the opportunity to reach them. The younger man's hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's arm with bruising force. "She's not alone. This was coordinated." His eyes bored into hers with cold fury. "Check the perimeter. Full sweep, all sensors on maximum sensitivity." Jim was already running toward the secondary structure, rifle at the ready, blood still streaming from the claw marks on his face. The third man disappeared back inside, shouting something about backup systems and containment protocols. Sarah found herself being dragged toward the main building by the younger man, his grip painfully tight on her arm, fingers digging into the flesh above her elbow. "You're making a mistake," Sarah said, trying to dig in her heels against the rough ground. Pain shot through her shoulder as he yanked her forward. "I don't know what you think is happening, but I'm not part of any operation. I'm just a photographer who—" "Shut up," he snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence. His face was a mask of controlled rage. "You're going to tell us exactly who you're working for and how you found this place. Wildlife Services, EPA, or one of those eco-terrorist groups?" He practically spat the last words, his contempt evident. As they neared the main entrance, a bone-chilling scream tore through the air. Not human, but the unmistakable shriek of a mountain lion in combat. It came from inside the secondary structure, followed immediately by shouts and then a gunshot that echoed across the clearing and reverberated off the surrounding mountains. "No!" Sarah cried, instinctively lurching toward the sound. The young man's grip tightened, his fingers digging in with brutal efficiency. But Sarah was beyond caution now. With strength born of desperation, she twisted in his grasp and brought her knee up sharply between his legs. He doubled over with a grunt of pain, his hold loosening just enough for her to break free. Sarah sprinted toward the secondary building, heart pounding in her ears, legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled strength. She had no plan, no weapon, only the desperate need to help the animal that had trusted her. Behind her, she could hear the young man shouting, recovering from her attack more quickly than she'd hoped. She burst through the door into chaos. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the heavy musk of frightened wild animals. Metal cages lined the walls, most empty now, but bearing evidence of recent occupation. Tufts of fur, scattered bedding, water bowls still half full. At the far end of the room, Jim stood with his rifle raised, blood streaming from 4 parallel claw marks that ran from his temple to his jaw, narrowly missing his right eye. On the floor lay the third man, unmoving, a dark stain spreading beneath him on the concrete floor. His throat had been torn open, blood still pulsing weakly from the wound in time, with a heart that would soon cease beating. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his hands frozen in a defensive posture that had proved woefully inadequate against a mother's fury. And in the corner, the mountain lion crouched protectively over 3 small cubs, her fur bristling, teeth bared in a snarl of maternal fury. Blood matted the fur of her left shoulder where a bullet had grazed her, and her breathing came in labored pants. The cubs, spotted and small, perhaps 3 months old, huddled against their mother's legs, their eyes wide with fear in their tiny faces. One of the cubs appeared injured, limping as it pressed against its mother's side, a bandage wrapped clumsily around its hind leg. The sight sent a surge of rage through Sarah. These men had not only captured wild animals, but had harmed a baby in the process, perhaps experimenting on it in some way. "Don't shoot," Sarah cried, placing herself between Jim and the cornered cats. "Please, you've already done enough damage." Jim's eyes were wild with pain and anger, his face pale beneath the blood that continued to flow from his wounds. "That beast killed Vince. Get out of the way." "If you shoot her, you'll have to shoot me too," Sarah said, spreading her arms wide to make herself a larger shield. Behind her, she could hear the soft growls of the mother cat, the mewling of her cubs. She could feel the weight of the mountain lion's gaze on her back, the same intelligent assessment that had drawn her into this adventure in the first place. "This facility is illegal. Those are protected animals under the Endangered Species Act. Whatever you're doing here, it's over." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the labored breathing of the wounded mountain lion and the soft whimpers of her cubs. Sarah could feel sweat trickling down her spine, her muscles trembling with the strain of maintaining her protective stance. One twitch of Jim's finger, and both she and the mountain lion family could be dead. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," Jim said, his voice low and dangerous. Blood dripped from his chin onto his shirt, staining the fabric a deep crimson. "This is bigger than some cats. We're developing treatments that could save thousands of human lives. These animals are serving a greater purpose." Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. "What are you talking about? What kind of research requires kidnapping wild mountain lions and their cubs?" Before Jim could answer, the door burst open again as the younger man entered, gun drawn, his face still flushed with anger from Sarah's escape. "Border Patrol chopper just flew over," he reported tensely, eyes darting to his dead colleague on the floor. "They're circling back. Must have picked up the gunshot." Jim's face contorted with indecision, the rifle wavering slightly in his grip. "We need to clear out. Now. Trigger the protocol." "What about her?" The younger man gestured toward Sarah with his pistol. "And them?" His gun shifted toward the mountain lions, huddled in the corner. Jim seemed to calculate his options, the rifle still trained on Sarah. Blood dripped from his lacerated face onto the concrete floor with a soft patter that somehow cut through all other sounds in the room. "We don't have time. Grab the hard drives and the samples. Everything else burns. 15 minutes to extraction." The younger man hesitated, his expression conflicted. "And the woman?" Jim's eyes met Sarah's, cold and calculating. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with deadly possibility. "She's seen too much. We can't leave witnesses." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd witnessed a death, could identify both men, had seen the inside of their illegal operation. In their minds, she was a liability they couldn't afford to leave behind. She thought of her cabin, of the note she'd left for Ranger Mike. If she didn't make it back, would they find her? Would they understand what had happened here? The mountain lion sensed the shift in tension. With a growl that seemed to vibrate the air itself, she moved forward, positioning herself beside Sarah rather than behind her. Human and predator now stood shoulder to hip, facing the armed men together in an alliance as ancient as it was unexpected. Outside, the distinctive whump-whump of helicopter blades grew louder, no longer just passing over, but circling, descending. Someone had indeed heard the gunshot and was investigating. Time was running out for everyone in that room, and the next few moments would determine who walked away and who didn't. "Think about what you're doing," Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. "Murder is a lot different from illegal wildlife research. Right now, you're looking at charges that might put you in prison. Kill me, and you'll never stop running." Jim's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his bloodied skin. "Danvers," he barked at the younger man, "start the protocol. I'll handle this." Danvers hesitated, his eyes darting between Jim, Sarah, and the circling helicopter now audible even through the building's insulated walls. "Jim, maybe we should—" "That's an order," Jim snapped. "We have 4 minutes before that chopper lands. Move." Danvers backed toward the door, his gun still raised, conflict evident in his expression. "Don't make it messy," he said finally, before disappearing through the doorway. Alone now with Jim, Sarah felt time slow to a crawl. The mountain lion pressed against her leg, a solid, warm presence that somehow steadied her despite the desperate situation. The cubs had gone silent, sensing the deadly tension in the room. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever you're involved in, whatever research you think justifies all this, it's not worth murder." Jim's finger tightened on the trigger, his expression hardening. "You think I haven't killed before? This is about something bigger than you or me or these animals. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good." "What greater good justifies kidnapping wild animals and experimenting on them?" Sarah demanded, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "What are you really doing here?" For a moment, Jim's resolve seemed to waver. "Cancer research," he said finally. "Mountain lions have an unusual resistance to certain types of carcinomas. Their cellular regeneration capabilities are unlike anything we've seen in other mammals. The applications for human medicine could be revolutionary." Sarah's mind raced. Then why the secrecy? Why not work through legitimate research channels? "Because the testing protocols we need wouldn't be approved," Jim said grimly. "Sometimes progress requires stepping outside conventional boundaries. History vindicates the bold. History condemns those who sacrifice ethics for expediency," Sarah countered. "Whatever you've discovered, this isn't the way." The helicopter was directly overhead now, its downdraft audible as it searched for a landing spot in the dense forest. Jim glanced upward, his momentary distraction giving Sarah an opening she hadn't dared hope for. With a swift movement, she reached into her pocket and pressed the emergency beacon on her satellite phone, activating the distress signal that would broadcast her exact coordinates to search and rescue services. The small click was barely audible, but Jim's eyes snapped back to her, narrowing with suspicion. "What did you just do?" he demanded, taking a step closer, the rifle now just feet from her chest. Before Sarah could respond, the mountain lion made her move. With explosive speed that belied her injured state, she launched herself not at Jim, but at his rifle, her powerful jaws closing around the barrel and wrenching it upward just as his fingers squeezed the trigger. The shot went wild, embedding itself in the ceiling as man and beast tumbled to the floor in a chaotic tangle of limbs and fur. Sarah didn't hesitate. She lunged for the fallen rifle, her fingers closing around the warm metal as Jim fought to disentangle himself from the mountain lion's powerful form. The cat didn't press her advantage, instead retreating to her cubs, positioning herself between them and the humans once more. Now it was Sarah holding the weapon, her hands shaking but her grip firm, "Don't move," she ordered, the unfamiliar weight of the rifle strange in her hands. "It's over, Jim." Outside, voices shouted commands. Boots pounded on hard-packed earth, and the distinctive crackle of official radios announced the arrival of law enforcement. The mountain lion's ears pricked forward at the sounds, her intelligent eyes fixed on Sarah as if asking a question. "Go," Sarah whispered to the cat. "Take your babies and go. There's a back exit." She gestured with her head toward a small door at the rear of the building, designed perhaps for waste, disposal, or emergency evacuation. The mountain lion seemed to understand. With efficient movements, she gathered her cubs, gently gripping the injured one by the scruff of its neck. The other two followed close behind as she padded toward the exit, pausing only once to look back at Sarah with those remarkable eyes. A look that contained something Sarah would later struggle to describe as anything other than gratitude. As the door swung shut behind the departing family, Sarah kept the rifle trained on Jim, who sat bleeding and defeated on the concrete floor. "You've just released a valuable scientific resource," he said bitterly. "Those animals could have helped save lives." "Those animals deserve to live their own lives," Sarah countered. "And now they will." The front door burst open, flooding the room with sunlight and the silhouettes of armed Border Patrol agents. "Federal agents, hands where we can see them." Sarah carefully placed the rifle on the floor and raised her hands. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she called out. "I'm a wildlife photographer. This man and his associates have been running an illegal research facility using captured endangered species." As the agents secured the scene, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. The mountain lion had chosen her, trusted her, and together they had accomplished what neither could have done alone. Somewhere in the vast wilderness beyond this clearing, a mother and her cubs were returning home, wild and free, as nature intended. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that her own life would never be the same. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of statements, examinations, and questions. Sarah found herself at the center of an investigation that expanded by the hour. "Ms. Mitchell, I need you to go through the sequence once more," said Special Agent Diana Reyes, a compact woman with shrewd eyes. "Start from when you first encountered the mountain lion." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "As I've said repeatedly, the mountain lion appeared at my cabin 3 days ago, exhibiting deliberate behavior. She led me to the facility where they were holding her cubs." "And you maintain that the mountain lion specifically sought you out?" "I know how it sounds, but yes, that's exactly what happened." Agent Reyes remained professional. "The facility has been secured. Nexus Therapeutics appears to have been conducting unauthorized research on protected species. Were you familiar with this company?" Sarah shook her head. "Never heard of them. They're a subsidiary of a pharmaceutical conglomerate. Officially, they specialize in cancer research. Unofficially, they kidnap endangered species and experiment on them." Sarah finished grimly. "The operation was sophisticated. We've identified similar facilities across the Northwest," Reyes explained. "Their research involved genetic modification and tissue harvesting without regulatory oversight." "And the mountain lions?" "Mountain lions possess cellular properties that make them resistant to specific carcinomas. They were attempting to isolate proteins unique to the species, then test experimental therapies." "On the cubs?" Sarah said, remembering the bandaged leg. "The mother and cubs weren't found," Reyes added. "The tracking collar was discovered miles from the facility. She must have removed it somehow." Sarah smiled slightly. "She's smart," smarter than anyone gave her credit for. The drive back to her cabin was surreal. Ranger Mike Hollister accompanied her, concerned about her well-being. "You holding up okay?" Mike asked as they approached her property. "I'm not sure what I am right now," Sarah admitted. "It's knowing what was happening in our forest. How many animals have suffered because of them?" "The investigation will answer those questions," Mike assured her. "You saved those cubs." "The mountain lion saved her cubs," Sarah corrected gently. "I just helped." 2 weeks later, Sarah received a call from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the regional wildlife biologist. "Sarah, I'm at your trail camera site. You need to see this." At the meeting point, Elena handed Sarah her tablet. "This was captured yesterday at dawn." The screen showed the mountain lion standing before the camera, staring directly into the lens. Around her feet, 3 healthy cubs drank from a spring. "They're okay," Sarah whispered. "More than okay," Elena said, swiping to a video. "Watch this." The footage showed the mother lion deliberately placing her paw on a small rock beneath the camera, holding the pose before departing with her cubs. "I've never seen anything like it," Elena said. "It's almost as if she knew exactly what the camera was," Sarah finished. "As if she wanted to be seen." Before leaving, Elena pointed out something remarkable about the rock. It contained a perfect fossil of an ancient fern, rare for that elevation. That evening, Sarah placed the fossil on her windowsill. She opened her laptop and began to write, not a scientific paper, but a personal record of her experience. She typed a title: "The Language of Lions." Outside, darkness fell over the forest. Somewhere in the wilderness, a mother lion led her cubs through their territory. And perhaps, in whatever way mountain lions understood such things, she remembered the human who had helped her when no one else could.